essence of the book. And I will place it. Before I get into the book, I want to place it on the first and primary premises in which the book is there. Book is discussed. Or the essence is found in this caste, understanding caste through diverse sources. And I classify the sources: one, religious text and manuscripts; two, inscriptions and edicts, the Asoka's stone edicts, and also the palm leaf manuscript, government official records, colonial government official record, social science research, modern social science research, historical, political, and economical aspect of studies on caste. So that is caste-based studies. And then other genre in which the caste can be understood or exist, the understanding of caste exists. Very important and neglected as area which social science generally not much grip with it is biography and autobiography. Biography and autobiographies where there is a huge huge material to understand the nuance of caste, how it is practiced, and certain very minute details are available. Then novels, biography, autobiography, novels, short stories, including poetry, and of course, in the contemporary time, even the visual representation, art and paintings, and other forms of cultural artifact. And latest one, cinema, both popular and print, popular and commercial cinema, where caste. These are the sources in which caste can be understood and studied, are represented. Caste, in order to understand caste, these are the sources can be classified. Lakshmi Narasu, a scholar, this book is written and first published in 1922. I think even before Dr. Ambedkar get into a full swing of political participation and political movement. And in the introduction, because this is edited and introduced by one of the very committed social scientist, Professor G. Aloysius, who has done an exemplary contribution in the current time, contemporary Tamil politics, particularly more than 100 years later. He has compiled one of the very prominent Buddhist scholar, and also the founder of the theoretician of the Dravidian movement and the Dravidian rationality. So Pandit Ayodhyadas, a Tamil Buddhist, he has compiled more than 3,000-4,000 of his 7 years of his journal. It's called Tamilan, and he has brought out in 1996, which made huge debate in Tamil politics, particularly South Indian politics. And Aloysius, as introducing the author in a much more nuanced detail about his personal life. I'm not going to give all the detail, but Professor Lakshmi Narasu devoted this book to Petit Tyagaraju, and who was a founding member of the Dravidian party in Tamil Nadu, South Indian non-Brahmin movement in early 1900. So he devoted this book to him as a friendship and admiration. And Aloysius made a very prominent this thing. He is a very prominent public intellectual of that time. He has participated across organization, not only caste-based group, but also civic associations of Madras cities and also Madras presidency. and he's ardent propagating what Aloysius called this. He was a humanist rationality. He is a fundamental principle in which he writes, speaks total confidence and total radical human rationality. Before that, in the contemporary time, one of the another prominent scholar, it is Singaravelu. Singaravelu, who was a left-leaning, communist-leaning, and who was also his contemporary. He has a radical atheistic rationality, and Ayatidasar's Tamil Dravidian rationality. This three trend is in the early 1900s in Tamil politics was there. So he has participated many across the meeting, conference, and continuously intervening in the colonial state, mobilizing people towards humanist rational emancipation, for which he took Buddhism as a fundamental principle and political agenda in terms of his idea foregrounding. Then the book, particularly what Lakshmi Narasu found, saying that the caste is not just in the Indian phenomena. Similar like caste is also found in various other cultural communities, such as in Egypt. The similar kind of structure, not exactly same, but similarity is visible in that time. But it has changed. But caste is remain as it is. One is what is called, he is quoting Herodotus, 7 division of social division. What are the 7 division? Priest, warrior, cavyard, a swineherd, merchant, interpreter, pilot. 7 division of society has been divided into these 7 division. And similarly, he says Iranian and cultural community. Iranian, what he founds, the similarity of Veda, and there is a Avesta. In Iranian language, it is called Avesta. And they found some of the similarity, like even the ceremonies. What is the Punul ceremony? In Tamil, Tuaja, in Hindi, it is called sacred thread wearing ceremony. Similar kind of sacredness practice is also visible, found in the Iranian. So he makes a parallel comparison, what are the available and what are the similarities one could find in those histories. And he was now Lakshmi Narasu basically tried to understand the caste, that nature, the relation or interface between nature, man, God, and religion, and then Veda and the sacrifice. Sacrifice and advocated by the Brahmanism or a Brahmin, and based on the birth, because he is not offering any new kind of explanation, what we already and in our own readings and in our own studies, we had already pursued those ideas, but Lakshmi Narasu make it same thing, but not anything new. But in a way, he is critiquing interface, how it is interface, how it is established. What are the ways in which man relate to nature? What are the ways in which man related to religion? What are the way in which gods are created or myths are created? And this is what he was saying, that the caste is existed or the caste is constructed in uh, this interface and the relation between nature and man and the God. And that where the Brahmanism creates a mythic and mythology around this relationship. And this relationship has completely graded on birth, based on the birth, and Brahmins have established their superiority. In order to establish their superiority, they have created the aura around the sacrifice, and the meat or sacrificing animals, sacrificing human, and also sacrificing fire. Agni has become a major component for creating fear psychosis among the society. And they have the special capability or special talent. And that is why he's saying that caste stands on a very, very important three major principles. What are these three major principles? Artificially specialized hereditary occupation. Artificial specialized hereditary occupation. Second, mutual repulsion between one caste against another caste. Third is hierarchical organization. The society is organized with a complete hierarchical way. So this artificial specialization of hereditary occupation, that is, a person born as a Sudra, he continued to Sudra till his end. A person born as a Kshatriya or Vaishya, he has to continue to be a Kshatriya and Vaishya. And there is no, and they have to profess what is the Veda. And Veda is come out of the ceremonial, ritual ceremonial and ritual sacrifices of Agni. Agni is nothing but a Brahmin. Agni is a synonym, a euphemism for a Brahmin or a god, Brahminical god. So that is why they have established their supremacy in the society. And the constantly what is happening, the militia, the untouchable, they are historically they are resistant to all the Brahminical supremacy. Though there is a possibility of Kshatriya and Vaishya becoming a Brahmin, but Sudra cannot become a Brahmin. And no way, the militia is no way in the concern to the any of this structure of Brahminism or Hinduism. Hinduism nothing but a Brahminism. Brahminism nothing but a casteism. And casteism is a graded and hereditarily organized society. And this hereditary or specialized society has to, those who violate and those who obey sincerely, reward and the penalty. Those who obey sincerely, they will be rewarded mythically. It is not real. And if you are follow your own caste occupation, you will rewarded in the next birth. In the next birth or in the heaven, you will be given rewarded by the God. So you should obey the caste rules and the caste customs, traditions. So similarly, Vaishyas and Sudra. Sudra is manual laborer to serve the above three communities. And what is found interesting is there is a constant struggle between Brahmins and Kshatriyas. Buddha, Gautama Buddha, Sakya Muni, is the founder of a Buddhism. He is a preacher of a Buddhism, and there is a clear-cut fight between Buddhism. That is what Baba Sahib Ambedkar, in his description, the Indian history is like the struggle between, the constant war between Brahmanism and the Buddhism, which the Lakshmi Narasu established very, very emphatic throughout his book. Different how Brahmin adapt despite changing political power from medieval, from ancient to medieval, and also from Asoka to Gupta, Maurya dynasty to Gupta dynasty, Ghajini, and invader of Islamic ruler. All this time, Brahmins adapt some or other technique to retain their power. And Asoka was brilliantly, is it Jeel of Asoka, Jeel of Ghajini, and Jeel of Ghajini, Jeel of Aurangzeb. He was giving a photographic detail about the history, how they have made this Asoka period is basically Buddhism is a non-violent, vegetarian, and against sacrifice, and not believe in eternal birth or heaven or anything, and purely the existential day-to-day human rational beings. How to respect the fellow human being based on their ability and capacity, based on the merit, and human sacrifice or animal sacrifice completely banned. But it is not compulsory, one should be a vegetarian. And Asoka, there is a reference somewhere, Asoka, he likes the meat of deer. Deer meat was a favorite delicacy for Asoka. And he's saying that in the lunch or dinner, it is allowed, non-vegetarian. Meat eating was allowed, but not ritual animal sacrifice, completely prohibited. And there are, he was narrating many of Asoka's edicts, 1, 2, 3, 8, 12, all these things. I think Professor Bhargava is elaborately discussed about the civility of Asoka in the early his time. I think he has a paper, and also when he came to MIDS, he gave a 1.5 hour very emphatic lecture, brilliant. So it is available. He is quoting all these things. This is available even in this. And what is Lakshmi Narasu's, the contestation between Brahmin and Kshatriyas, Buddhism and Brahminism, and also philosophical contestation of absolute philosophy and relative philosophy. Absolute philosophy is the Brahminical, and relative philosophy is a Buddhist philosophy. Absolute and relative philosophies. And then, and also the way in which the Kshatriyas are able to establish their dominance, their control against Brahmin, and also it is similar to some kind of he was arguing like state of nature and the social contract. Okay, the warrior, the Kshatriya's principal duty is a protector of the field. The field land is a fundamental, and the labor who are till the land or own the land, the warrior has to protect their land and also their land produce, for which they have to pay a certain tax, in which they survive. The warrior, the king. So basically, he is saying it is like social contract, because he said that the state is the warrior state is nothing but the state of protector of the field. And when the land and the resource was equally distributed or equally shared among this community, there was no problem, right? And only there is someone would always encroach or aggression against someone weak or someone engaged in other profession instead of agriculture or cultivation. So then there is a conflict between the weak and the mighty, where the warrior come and intervene and protect as establish a peace and harmony between them. So that is why there is only the private, when there is a aggression among the society, one against another. It's not based on religious or a ritual or a ceremony. It is purely based on aggression about encroaching the other's property, where the conflict comes. And those conflict and warriors like Kshatriya is intervene as a middleman and protect them. And he is making a lot of references to Upanishad, Rig Veda, Yajurveda, and so on and so forth. And Rig Veda is one of the boldest Veda in this Hindu philosophical tradition, and it is talked about the briefly the after death, soul and body, and also they justify the sati and the women's subordination. All these things we have known, but he is very historically establishing his argument very emphatically. And the sacrifice is a symbolic for attaining moksha. Attaining moksha, that was advocated by the Brahmanical. Sacrifice is advocated by the Brahmanical this thing in order to attain the moksha. Then and during Ashoka period and during Maurya, he was saying Ashoka period was a very, very important in the history, and he has Kalinga, because even in reference to today's Orissa, the Lord Jagannath is a Buddhist god, and it is a Buddhist serene, and which even Yuan Shuang, the Chinese traveler, who recorded in his travel log about India and the Buddhist and the conflict, and also very particularly the Jeel of Chaitanya. Jeel of Chaitanya, he has recorded 1, 2, 3, 4 several aspects of what is the Lord temple of this Puri Jagannath. Today is a temple, but it is a Buddhist serene. So basically, there is a physical as well as a philosophical contestation between both in terms of Brahmanism and Buddhism. But in this discourses, what he was referring, he is saying that there are guna. There are 3 important guna: sattva, rajya, and tamasa. Sattva is a world of Lord, a world of God, and raja is men who concerns and protect the fellow human being, and tamasa is about animal instinct, and is going on the discourse on philosophy and other this thing. What is very striking in the book was he was explaining how democracy, how Buddhism was as a political philosophy and embodied with the democratic principle, individual liberty, freedom, and all these virtues and values are very essential for the not only individual attaining self realization, but also the emancipation of the society and the state. Emancipation of So society and state is a very essential, where the Western democracy or a democracy per se. And today I surprised in the book saying, because very famous quotation or famous Ambedkar's note on Indian democracy, where he says democracy is not merely a form of government, but it's an associated life. It's an associated life of communities, and it is associated social relationship with a fellow human being. That was very well Lakshmi Narasu establishing in this book. I think he is never refer, and also he is providing Kabir cult, and how Kabir and Kalidas and even Punjab Sikh religion, Jainism, Vaishnavism, the contestation between or relation difference between Saivaism, Vaishnavism, and Advaita, all these things are he is trying to establish, and also he is providing how Western education, Ram Mohan Roy, he is able to understand the democratic values of a Western philosophy, because that is where Ram Mohan Roy's intervention on social reform, establishing social reform, he is mentioning, is crediting Ram Mohan roles. But what is striking, he is not able to refer anywhere Jyotirao Phule, or even in Tamil, because he is establishing how Tamil language has been juxtaposing to the Sanskrit language and culture, and the Dravidian language and Dravidian race juxtaposing to Aryan and Northern. This conflict he is establishing discussing in the book, but he is not referred to the movement of. He is referring to Kabir and other Bhakti Chokamelas and those traditional and cult in terms of religious discourses and the intervention in the philosophical discourse. But he is not at all mentioning both. Nowhere he is mentioning about Ambedkar or even Jyotirao Phule's Satyasodak movement. And also in the Kerala, he is referring to the Kerala, how caste system is prevails in Kerala, particularly Nair mother, Brahmin father. So that is a well-known history in how the women of Nair have been exploited by the Brahmin man in the Kerala society, which he was referring to the Trangur dynasty, how this system of women's subordination, sexual exploitations are, and again he was very much establishing how women being seen as a sexual object. They are not seen as a human being or a self with a certain being, but they are merely a commodity or merely a and also is subscribing the how sati was subscribed, and Buddhism is against the sati, but at the same time surprisingly was saying Buddhism was more a moralistic ground, saying that the women, the chastity concept of chastity, it was very much propagated by the Buddhism as well. And that was surprising, because the Buddhist notion of chastity established in terms of, in order to have a moral or a moralistic or a moral policing of women. So that is, he was saying that it is surprising how Buddhism is justifying the chastity in their philosophy. That is the one thing we have to understand. And he was a reference to what is religion and how religion should be. That is a striking striking description he cites. I just read out that 3-4 lines, which is very important. Religion does the religion does not board over the future life, but it is intentionally occupied with the present, because that means religion should not preoccupied with the heaven or external after death, but it has to be very much engaged in the present. It does not surmiss the something behind the nature, because one should live with the nature what it is, and one should not exaggerate or make something as a nature as unnatural or a supernatural. Supernatural is a detrimental for any religious propagation. The contemplating nature itself does not sink political organization, but it itself soul of all the healthy political organization, because religion should be a soul of healthy political organization. It does not dump enjoyment, but itself the principle of all rich enjoyments. It is not a self-conscious and self-absorbed, and does not make us anxious about our own fate, but it is the principle in which that destroys self and gives us the strength to rise above the personal anxieties. So religion should give us enjoyment. Religion should give us, should not make anxious about the fate and the external world. It should more the contemporary and the present, and also it should, if at all anyone has anxiety, religion should have some solace to come out of such anxiety. And finally, the true emancipation can become only by abandoning the struggle of private happiness, devoting oneself to a larger life and wider interest. So one should not, because the Brahmanical caste system, totally the core of Brahmanical caste system is vested and self-interested, and not to bother about the fellow human being, or even he live with the exploitation of other labor. And therefore he says that the emancipation can only come by the abandoning the struggle for private happiness and the devoting oneself to a larger life and the wider interest. And finally he makes a reference to German. Make a reference to how the Germany overcome similar kind of system, but through democratic struggles and revolution. He says revolution. Germany has come out of similar hierarchical or superior inferior division within the society. And therefore Germany, he cites a Germany example, and also Japanese similar caste system exists in Japanese, and they have overcome. Whereas in India, we could not overcome. And he says the Hindu society have furnished an opportunity of breeding a class of parasites. Hindu society have furnished an opportunity for breeding a class of parasite who have thrive on the lifeblood of their victim. It is, however, the consolation that a parasitic habit leads to the course of time of a destruction of the parasite. Every society needs an organization of some sort, but organization must be based on solidarity, rising from the sense of community and voluntary and cooperation. Solidarity implies that each feels answerable to all and each for all. Solidarity is a sense can grow only in an atmosphere of individual freedom. Every individual should have a freedom. So this is a very intriguing observation about the negative of Hindu society and how the society should be, the positive, how society should be. So both he have given established, and caste system is the mainstay of Hindu religion and the Brahmanism. And he was critiquing, as usual, Gandhian position on caste. And also Vivekananda, he quotes Vivekananda, caste is nothing but multi-layered compartment of the society. Multi-layered compartment of the society, and which is not able, nobody knows what is in the other compartment. And it was beautifully, he was referring how Vivekananda, not Vivekananda, Vivekananda is quoting, but Tagore, he was citing a Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore was saying that the caste is a multi-layered compartment of social structure, and which is a great detrimental for any modern progress. And it is already, which Ambedkar said, caste is killed the public spirit, caste destroy the common sense, so on. So it's a very famous quote. But he has essence, in essence, he was providing various scholars, various the contemporary, those days in 1900, early 1900, Swami Vivekananda, Tagore, Gandhi, and many others reference he was. So overall, this book, this Lakshmi Narasu has read extensively both on caste and philosophy. Extensively. Only thing, he was not providing the detail of references and also the coherent argument. He was jumping one to another, and also is a very complex way of arguing. And he was arguing, he was crediting Aurangzeb as one of the best ruler of in the medieval India, or the Muslim dynasty. But he was a very, very religious person. But his religion was personal, and he never harmed. Even much better than Akbar. Akbar was portrayed a very nice person, but Akbar was convinced of some extent the Brahminical values. And therefore he was appointing some Hindus in his governance system for advisor, or some other responsibility. He is in those bestowed with Brahmins in the Akbar. But Aurangzeb, he was very religious. Every day, 8 hours is worship, and live in a very simple life, and also advocating for a simple life. But he was concerned with the public good and the welfare. So he was saying that despite their religious difference, but he's saying even Christianity has the bias towards the poor, or even underprivileged. Among the Christians, there is some kind of caste. And even in Islam also has some kind of caste structure, which in principle it is not there. As a religion, as Islam, it doesn't have any hierarchical system, or it not sanction religion. Islam never sanction graded in a structure, but the practice of Islam is something as a different. So he was recording those differences which existed in the medieval Muslim rules in India, and where he was saying how Brahmin is able to accommodate themselves to the changing political form rules, or changing political power structure, and they are able to maintain the supremacy despite the conflict of entering into the caste. And throughout the discussion, the Milatias stands alone and outside, and constantly in contesting the Brahminical superiority. They never ever even iota, because throughout the book he was continuously, that point was well established. And
Lakshmanan.
and this is I'll just complete. And this
No,
is a
you can take more time. I just want to tell you, I mean, if you want to take a few more minutes, you're most welcome to. But it's just that you yourself wanted to speak.
I'll complete. I will when discussion question and answer comes, I'll be very happy in question and answer than the mono presentation. I myself. So in conclusion, what I say, despite he has done the large historical, religious, cultural canvas, but there is a limitation, large limitation of this book is no systematic continuity one to another, and also he is not till the end. He was not able to establish the clear-cut way in which how the caste originated, or whether the caste-like structure was there or remains there, but it was not, except in the end he was saying in Germany, because in the initial period never quoted, he quoted only Egypt and the Iranian, and suddenly in the end he is bringing Germany and the Japanese. So there is a discontinuity and this thing, but it contents with so much of argument, both in the Western and modern philosophical, religious discourse of various kind. So that is what it's comprehending. This book is challenging. I stop here, and if any, because we can only have a conversation. That is, I once again I thank. I hope I can. This is my perception, and reading of this book could be to others may differ. That is also I have a word of caution I say. But I understood this as a very, very extensive. One thing that why this book has not been brought to the public discourse of even the scholars are intensely engaging on caste, both sociologists, political scientists, economists, and historian, and hardly anyone refers in my limited reading of this social science discipline. And this is certainly provide an eye of new understanding, new way of looking at understanding caste. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lakshmanan. That was wonderful. I think I just wanted to say two things, not regarding his thought, but a couple of points on what you said about his importance as a public intellectual and why he was neglected. And also, the way he writes. I think, if I remember, his training, he was trained as a physicist.
Physics.
Right?
Science. He's a professor of science.
So he's a great polymath. And these are tracts which he writes for newspapers and for magazines, I think. And they are all sort of coming out of that genre. So he's not an academic, and so he's not obliged to, put all these footnotes and give references. I think you remarked about the flow in his writings, but since he was neither a professor in a university nor trained as a social scientist, he had no. I mean, he was under no obligation to follow those protocols, and that is probably his strength, not his weakness. You are absolutely right that these are figures that should be far better studied, but then our own attention to these figures and to some of these texts are, that is, we've been drawn to these only recently. I mean, it's only 20 years or so since we started to attend to these Indian thinkers. So I'm not surprised that very little work has been done on them. And we must be grateful to Aloysius and to people like yourself for bringing us, bringing them to our notice. I mean, I just sort of skimmed through a little bit of what he had to say, and I was deeply impressed by his own observations on the conflict between some of the thinkers of that time, Kshatriyas and Brahmanism, and how he interprets a lot of the rewriting of the epics, the inscription of the epics itself is seen as a kind of a response, a semi-Buddhist response to Brahmanism, or rather, a Brahminical response to some of the Buddhist currents in that period. So there's a lot of very interesting material there. Thank you, and let's have a quick discussion. Let's have some questions and answers, and then Lakshmanan can respond. Yeah. Parthu.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lakshmanan, for introducing this book to us. I had heard of the name of Lakshmi Narasu, but I had never had the chance of reading anything by him. And now, of course, a few little details of his biography have emerged. And you say that Aloysius has written more extensively on him. So I'll certainly find that and read more, because I found this book quite remarkable in lots of ways. Let me just point out three or four things that I found especially striking. The parallels with Ambedkar, who of course would write some 10, 15, 20 years later, are they're fairly straightforward. You can make those connections. But I found some other features of this book which are particularly striking. So first is, let me point out this argument that he makes about the connections between the Vedic Sanskrit speaking people and the Iranians. Now, clearly, Lakshmi Narasu was very familiar with the writings that had gone on through the 19th century among linguists, particularly in Europe, about the linguistic connections between, the so-called Aryan people, their migration from Central Asia, and the different streams in which they split up, and this connection between, the Rig Veda Sanskrit and the Avesta. This kind of connection was fairly well established by then. He was very clearly familiar with this. But what was more striking to me was the argument that he makes then about the encounter between these people, he's calling them Aryans, and the Dravidians, who he says were a well-developed, had a well-developed civilization, which had large artisanal crafts kind of basis. They were sea traders. Now, what's interesting is that he's writing this book in 1922. And the Mohenjo-daro excavations are just going on, to be announced only in, I think, 24 or 25. Before that, nobody knew of the existence of this, what would later be called the Harappa civilization. And of course, that has now produced a huge corpus of writing of the connection between the Harappa peoples and the so-called Dravidians and the later migration of the Aryans, whether or not, in fact, of course, we know the Hindutva people don't accept this, but let's put that aside. What is striking is that even in 1922, he is making this very interesting claim about the connections between a developed Dravidian civilization, which pre-exists the Aryan, and the connection between the Aryans in Northwest India and the Iranians and their dealings with the Dravidians, right? This is very much part of the current discussions that I've come across about the Harappa civilization. Now, the second thing that's very interesting is his argument about caste. Now, what is striking to me, I mean, I'm broadly familiar with the sociology of caste as it's been produced, from the 19th century onwards. What's particularly striking is that writing in 1922, he is actually not taking very seriously the Brahminical textual literature on the meaning of caste, but he's putting far greater emphasis on the actual existence of what we call jatis, right? The actual evolution of jatis and the changeability of jatis, the variety of jatis, the fact that there are dozens and dozens of jatis in every region of India, that jatis can actually move through mobility, social mobility. They're placed within the hierarchy that can change over time. So all of these things are completely part of what he's describing. Why this is remarkable is that if you look at the standard sociologies, even people writing after this, think of Ghurye, think of Iravati Karve, writing in the 1930s, 40s, they are still basically describing caste in terms of the textual material. It's only after 1950s when you have the village studies people coming up, Srinivas and the Delhi school people, that's when this whole thing, that is when we begin to understand caste as we now understand it. But it seems to me that Lakshmi Narasu already has a very good sense of what caste actually means, which is jati. Now, the third thing to be noted there is, in terms of the caste argument that he's making, is that he is actually then saying that even though castes can vary, their positions can vary, and he's showing, he's even got examples of specific castes which rise or fall in terms of their standing because of changing political or economic situations. What he's saying is that, and the argument that Lakshmanan was making, that caste is in a sense true everywhere. There is some kind of caste in all societies, right? What's interesting is that this is exactly it's almost a structuralist argument in embryo, because this is what the structuralists later in the 1950s, 60s would say exactly. I mean, Narasu has the famous article, which is said all societies have caste, because all societies have rules of endogamy and exogamy. Without it, you cannot define basic kinship structures. But the question is, and this is what Dumont, of course, again, following from this structuralist argument, would argue, and this is what I see is exactly Narasu's argument, that what is distinctive about Indian caste is precisely the absolute superiority of the Brahmin. Now, this does not exist anywhere else. The idea that there is one whose absolute superiority describes basically the entire social structure. So, jatis can move up or down in the middle, and this is what Dumont would later argue. But the absolute superiority of the Brahmin and the absolute inferiority of the untouchable, those have to be kept in place. In between, things can move up and down because of changing economic or political situations. Now, this, it seems to me, is something that Lakshmi Narasu seems to have grasped, right? His constant insistence that in spite of everything else, what is completely unchanging and the fundamental definition of the caste system in India is the absolute superiority of the Brahmin. Now, this I found particularly remarkable. Then, of course, he has this whole thing about the political history of, and this is essentially the impact of Buddhism, this is what he's wanted to establish. But curiously, he does it in terms of a kind of conflict between Kshatriyas and Brahmins. And in the end, what he's showing is that when Brahmanism reestablishes itself in the form of Puranic Brahmanism, right? That what it is doing is in fact absorbing all of the things that he's calling it Kshatriya, but essentially what Buddhism had introduced. None of that is actually rejected. It's all, as it were, absorbed into a re-established Puranic Brahmanism, right? Within the order of caste. Now, what is interesting to me here is that he is writing this in 1922. In 1923, Savarkar is writing Hindutva, right? Elements of Hindutva. And there he, again, for him, an absolutely central part of the story is the conflict between Buddhism and what he will call the Hindutva, or Hindu religion. And Savarkar's argument is the exact opposite. Because for Savarkar, it is Buddhism which spells the complete destruction of India. Because India becomes weak, this emphasis on non-violence, it leads to the invasion of India by foreigners. So he's basically means the Greeks and the Bactrians and Huns and Shakas and so on and so forth. And that is why the Maurya Empire collapses. And for a long period, there is nothing until under the Guptas. There is a re-establishment of the, basically the Varnashram order. And Savarkar, who was not a particularly strong supporter of the caste system, but Savarkar says that the rigors, he calls it excessive rigors of the caste system, which were brought into place under the Guptas. He said that was necessary only because of the damage that Buddhism had done. And of course, we all know that, for Buddhism, for Savarkar, you have to read Gandhism also. That is what he was really fighting here. But it's a very interesting, it seems to me, that almost at the same time, these two people are presenting this history of Buddhism in India and the possible, and then the subsequent decline of Buddhism in India in these two very different political readings, right? Almost exactly at the same time. The final thing that I found very interesting was Lakshmi Narasu's basically his idea of what should happen now, right? The possibilities of a democratic India. And there, in some sense, in certain passages, it almost seems like a fairly straightforward liberal individualist kind of argument. That what we need is freedom of opportunity, right? And this is what is completely not allowed under the Brahminical caste system. So that must go. But then there is and again, arguing from a Buddhist standpoint, he's also making all of those arguments against atheism, against the belief in God. It's a very interesting argument he makes there, and I wasn't able to quite decide whether the argument he's wanting to make is from a kind of enlightenment, rationality, science kind of position, or is it from a Buddhist position? Because at one level, you'll find he has this he clearly has a great problem, because he says there is no such thing as the soul. The soul cannot exist, it does not exist, right? And yet, in Buddhism, you have this whole phenomenon of the transmigration of souls, the soul not being destroyed, right? Being reborn in another being. And that argument, he clearly has a great difficulty in dealing with that argument. Because, at one level, you can easily take a Buddhist position and say, all material, all matter has already been created. You don't need a creator. No new matter is ever created. Matter is simply transformed from one form to another. So when, for instance, a living being creature dies, the bodily form simply disintegrates into some other organic forms of matter. But what happens to the soul? And this becomes, so in Buddhism, there's a way of dealing with that. The soul is also never destroyed. It simply moves from one being to another being. But the problem is that the difficulty is that Narasu does not want to admit of the soul. And so at some point, I feel that it's, his final argument about religion, where he says, he clearly is in favor of science, sees the need for something to do with things like the solace, with emotions, with imagination, those kinds of things. And for all that, science cannot fulfill. So at some point in that last section, and another very interesting thing, he completely dismisses when he speaks of solidarity and community. Nationality is not the answer for him. Solidarity and community finally is all of humanity, which is, of course, a kind of Buddhist argument. So in the end, I wasn't sure whether, this is sort of similar to Ambedkar's predicament. Is he trying to read into Buddhism what he has come to accept from European Enlightenment rationality, or is he actually arguing from within Buddhism in order to deal with Western modernity? I wasn't very sure what their position is. I mean, that would be an interesting thing to think about. But I really found this book extremely remarkable.
So we have 4 questions, but before that, I just add a footnote to Partho's excellent additional and complementary exposition of Lakshmi Narasu, and that is that I didn't read it carefully. I didn't go through the book. I just sort of skimmed through bits of it, and I found it very, very contemporary. In other words, the kind of issues that are being raised today about ancient India, about Brahmanism, about Puranic Buddhism, and Puranic Brahmanism, and Puranic Brahmanism as a response to the challenge that Buddha's teachings pose to as crafted his argument is very much along these lines, and he seems to be very much our contemporary rather than somebody who can be sort of pushed to the history of these ideas, but not relevant. He seems to be extremely relevant in today's debates and discussions. The other point that I wanted to make was that, I mean, the claim about the absolute superiority of the Brahmins as being a feature of the caste system. Let's not forget that this is a claim which is made by the Brahmins and by a certain kind of Brahmins. It is neither descriptive of the society. I mean, it's not a sociological claim. It's a normative claim, and it's not a representative claim. It doesn't represent the views of everybody. It's just the most well-known view, certainly in the 19th century, about what Brahmanism is, or about what Hinduism would be taken to be. But it is how contested it is, how representative it is. This is something which, far more work has to be done on this. Okay, so We have Mangesh, Nilanjan, this is as I see them, Vishnu, and is there anybody else? Three, yeah. So in that order. So Mangesh.
Okay, thanks. One of the I want to actually ask two kinds of questions. One has to do with Lakshmi Narasu's global context, and one with his regional context. So the global context, actually, as it happens to many of us, we are not familiar with thinkers from other regions and figures like this who are not those iconic national figures. So I remember 10 years ago at an international conference on philosophy of science, an Austrian scholar asked me about Lakshmi Narasu, and I hadn't the foggiest who he was really. But there I discovered from the question that this person, Austrian scholar asked me, about Lakshmi Narasu
Mangesh, I think there is some
Mark with Mark and was.
I don't think we can all hear what you're saying.
You can't hear me?
You can't. You can't
Sorry?
be heard.
Mangesh, your voice is getting cut. So I think it's possible. Could you just keep the audio on and switch off the video? That may improve it.
I'll do that.
Yeah.
Is that better? Does it make a difference now?
Yeah, it is better.
Yes.
It is better.
Yes.
Fine. So basically, I was just saying that, Lakshmi Narasu apparently corresponded with Ernst Mach. And he, Mr. Mach's ideas, his physicalism, etc. And if you look at his Lakshmi Narasu's book on Buddhism, I think he actually cites Mach there. And I mentioned this because in the presentation, I think there was a particular reference to his, the philosophical range of engagements that he had. And I think there was a reference to what he calls this absolute kind of philosophy that he thought Brahmanism represented. So by that, I think one means meant a certain kind of metaphysics. And he seems to have used the anti-metaphysical, philosophy of Ernst Mach very clearly. So I just want to know if, in fact, any evidence of this correspondence has been found, because at least one German or Austrian scholar was looking for this, and whether any new light has been shed on it, on the Narasu Mach connection. That's one question I wanted to ask. And, the way, for example, Ambedkar drew on the work of Dewey. And here, of course, the connection was very direct because Ambedkar was a student, etc. And it's all well known in what ways Dewey influenced Ambedkar. But in the case of Narasu, I'm just curious. And secondly, the regional context, which is that I think Narasu was a Telugu person, a person of Telugu origin, and who belonged to a sort of a middle caste, perhaps, or a lower middle caste. He was a Kapu, I think. And I don't know how to exactly pronounce that word, Kapu. And that he came from a sort of what we would today call a sort of a creamy layer background. So I was wondering whether this, caste location and whether it had anything to do with his thinking. And, in that respect, he reminds me of Phule. Phule also came from a sort of a lower middle caste and from a creamy layer kind of background. And then just very quickly, I'm a little puzzled by the constant slotting of Iravati Guriye, but especially of Iravati Karve, as somebody who had a predominantly textual understanding of caste. I must admit that I read her work many years ago, and particularly I remember reading the book The Hindu Society and Interpretation, which is a late work. She wrote it late in her life, maybe late 50s or perhaps 60s. But she there talks about, for example, the notion of caste cluster, etc. Which is and there she had a debate with Gurye on this. How to conceptualize the caste system. She was an anthropologist who did extensive field work. And I'm not sure that this is the right way to slot her, which is not to say she was progressive by certain standards. For example, she was very critical of Buddhism, etc. And in some respects, perhaps she looked at Buddhism the way Savarkar did, as something that had an enervating influence on Indian civilization, if I remember right. And I also read quite a bit of her work in Marathi. But from what I remember, I'm not sure that it's fair to slot her that way.
Okay, yeah.
That's basically
So,
that's
Lakshmanan, do you want to respond? I can see many more hands now. I can see Ritik and Sashij also. So there are 4 more people who wish to raise questions. But before they come in, would you like to respond to anything that has already been said?
Myself, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to start with Lakshmi Narasu was a professor of professor of physics. I was teaching in Madras Christian College initially, and then he became principal of Pachipan College, Chennai, and he's very much in academics but science. And also, second point which I said, what Lakshmi Narasu makes in a global context about only similarity. He was very emphatically saying that it is a similarity, not same. What is the Egyptian division of society, 7 division of society, or a similarity of Vedic find in Iranian, or even other cultural community, which is just a similarity, not the same of caste structure here. And he makes even the evolution of the state in the modern state and nation state emerged, and the feudal mode of production is disappearing. There is a chance of those similarities are disappear. One can become a rich, or one can become a warrior from the lower ladder of Sudra or whatever. And there is no absolute barrier in the Egyptian or Iranian or even other society exist outside. Whereas it's a clear barrier has been built lifelong, and nowhere it is found. And also the Veda and the Vedic and Veda and sacrifices are means to exploit the people or create some kind of a mythical world, and claiming themselves we are the mediator, middleman between the god and the people. And then here Lakshmi Narasu able to explain the state here, because he was very much aware of a political debate in early 1900, and also he read Plato much seriously, and he was referring to Plato's Republic and the 4 division of the philosophical king and appetite, all similar kind of caste Varna system. But he's rejecting, and even Plato himself rejected that kind of notion. He was establishing those arguments. So he never ever saying that the caste was existed similarly there also, because he is very emphatically rejecting it is a similar but not the same. That is a one point. And he was a teacher, and of course I will write this collection of writing was compiled, and therefore there is no subtitle or footnote. But even Aloysius, when he was edited, he could have somewhere thematically he could have put organize the chapters, if not a footnote and anything, organize a chapter. That would be the because I aware of he is not a social scientist, but he was well versed in the way in which he is making a citing J.S. Mill and also various political thinkers, modern political thinkers, and it is a very much implied that he is a well-read political philosophy and the religious discourses. That is it. Yes, that's all.
Okay, so Nilanjan.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, sir. So it has been a very, I haven't read much, I think just read a little of that, but it has been a very interesting study. I think the way Lakshmi Narasu has compared India and certain other countries in terms of caste or various other categories like class, Egypt and China. But I had certain some confusions regarding that. 3-4 points. Now the three features of caste which Narasu has stated is, I think, heredity, hierarchy, and mutual repulsion. The three pillars of caste, I think, as far I got from his writing. So in the case of mutual repulsion, these are very strong words, and he didn't make much exception on that. And I felt that it was more on absolutist terms. Now, if mutual repulsion is absolute, then a society can't be stable, even a hierarchy can't be stable. And we know that caste, despite a lot of its problems, but has remained, has endured and still enduring till now. So was mutual repulsion absolute? So that's one thing. Because a society can't be stable if mutual repulsion is so much of a problem. So that's one thing, and we know that society has been quite stable in terms of caste. The second thing is quite again related to mutual repulsion from pages 7 and 8 of the book. Now I think I should read some parts here. So he writes here that the in the second paragraph of page number 7, the absolute superiority of the Brahmin is as uncontested as the absolute inferiority of the Pariah. So between these two extremes are a lot of other castes, and the rank of a caste is determined by blood, fidelity and administrative profession, abstention. These are there. The sacred texts are also here. Okay, but in practice, the criterion is settled by the Brahmins by receiving gifts, food, drink from its members. Now, this part. So if it's settled by the Brahmins, so at least in this part, there is no mutual repulsion, because at least the Brahmins have the legitimacy, and the others are recognizing that, based on which the others are going to them to get the recognition, giving them gifts, food or drink. But again, he comes in the same paragraph. He comes here that it is the conformity with the Brahmin that confers rank. In the eyes of the Orthodox Hindu, any other caste than his own is in a sense impure. So if there is a black and white situation in terms of inferiority and superiority, then how the other castes will say the other castes as impure? Because now this line is again absolute, because the Brahmins are not accepted here. There is no exception in the case of Brahmins. In South India, when a Brahmin enters a parachuri water mixed with cow dung, is sprinkled after leaves it, just as they do after a corpse is removed from a Hindu home. So here even the Brahmins are sort of ostracized. So this is he gives as an example of mutual. So in the same paragraph, there are some I don't know if it's contradiction or maybe some lack of clarity here. Even in page 8, we find this thing that even the lowest take a pride in their caste and are exclusive. So even at the lowest they're taking a pride in their caste, so again the inferiority clause is challenged. So even if a society looks inferior, the psychology of the people are not inferior. So there is some confusion here. I found in the writing. Any other little bit another part which I wanted some clarity. I think it's page number 5. He analyzes about China. He says that there has therefore never been in China great landlords renting their land to tenants. Now, as a little bit as far as I know of China, China was a feudal society, and even the revolutions in China more or less centered on these feudal conflicts. There were a lot of landlords out there. So the way he said here that there were not great landlords in China, that was a little bit problematic for me. So these are two on clarity. And the one question out of curiosity, the question is that where Narasu stand vis-a-vis other thinkers on the Dalit discourse, like Yothithas, his close companion, or Periyar, or Ambedkar. And one question particularly directed to Professor Partha Chatterjee, because I heard him mention about the Shahojiya in one of his earlier lectures. Certain specific caste critique groups in Bengal, like the Shahojiya or the Motua. So that I'm curious to know. So these are some of my observations. Two of these on clarity and one question.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Vishnu?
Yeah, right. Lakshmanan, thank you very much for this presentation. I just wanted you to say a little more about, you mentioned about the context of his writings, and you mentioned about Dravidian rationality in the beginning. I want to know what you say a little more about that, you know. And then second, I mean, this is a kind of general comment in the sense that, for example, in the 19th century, early part of 20th century, pretty much by 1930s and 40s, everybody who was a thinking Indian thought his business to write and reflect on society. It's only much later that knowledge, where really the protocols of knowledge were then becoming important within universities, and the university research and other things becoming more important. Otherwise, in much of the writings in the 19th century and early 20th century are the people who are doing other things, but also reflecting on society. So it's everybody's business. So there is something important about that. I agree with Rajiv that, you know, and that, you know, there's something interesting about that practice, or that enterprise, that everybody is reflecting on society and things like that. Finally, on the Buddhism and Hinduism relationship, you know, there's one you can, a lot of people have written about the theological side of it, or the philosophical or metaphysical side of it. But there is a kind of growing literature by ancient historians who are trying to understand is why in certain areas where Buddhism actually flourished but died out. What was the reason? For example, in Orissa, for example, there are various sites where Buddhism flourished. Now, what happened? You know, and there are many explanations offered. Of course, one explanation is the patronage, the decline of patronage. The other thing is that Buddhism, in order to spread, wanted to connect to popular practices. And while they incorporated more popular practices, they looked more like the popular Hinduism. So distinctions that they were trying to establish were really getting blurred. I'm just thinking of some work which I read. In the context of that, so there suddenly you find that, you know, the Buddhism's decline is not necessarily theological, but more so with the way one has to understand the sociological operations, even at the level on the ground, and how religion or religious practices kind of mix with societal relations and practices. And finally, there's one small evidence that why caste requires the system to continue is that after the 1866 famine in Orissa, for example, there was a text which was circulated, because the text was really a text that was distributed free just to tell people how to get back to caste if you ever lost your caste on account of the famine, because people went out, ate in a common kitchen called chhatras, and now you might have lost your caste, because of that, how to get back to the fold of the caste. And for every caste group, jati group, the prescriptions were not the same. They're very different. And the easier prescriptions are for the non-Brahmin caste, because for the Brahmins, it is very important that the other people come back to the caste easily. Don't make it so difficult. So this is very important. This is a kind of minor example to see that how the caste also operates on the ground in many ways. Thank you.
Ritik?
Sir, I'll answer. I respond to this too.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
First response to mutual repulsion, and also Professor Vishnu question on Dravidian rationality. Dravidian rationality was conceived and propagated Tamil Dravidian, it is a slash Tamil Dravidian Buddhist rationality by Ayodhyadas, and he was propagating that, rejecting and reconstructing the history of the South India, particularly Tamil, based on the Tamil language and Tamil culture, because he was the one who coined the Dravidian word itself, because he is a forerunner of today's Dravidian political discourse. That despite there was complete negation for a century, but he was constructing a very, very strong rationality based on Tamil Buddhist rationality, which is very, very popular and very constructive in a way, conceiving the history of Tamils vis-a-vis the Brahminical tradition and Brahminical notion of society, which is very clear. And even he was disputing all the rituals which is practiced by society, even the village gods, goddesses, and folklore gods and goddesses are Buddhist god. Mariamma, Kaliyamma, Pochamma, all these things are Buddhist god, which is an existential, materialistic way of reverence to the elder ancestors, which Ayodhyadas are very, very established, powerful. That is what is created. He has a rationality in the sense is make a reason why Mariamma is worshipped, why Kaliyamma is worshipped, why the bogi are throwing or discarding the antiquity and during bogi on Thai, on those things which are Sanskritized or Brahminized, and basically to destroy the knowledge protection of the working class in a way, quote unquote. Otherwise, it is oppressed the militia and untouchable. So, and he was saying, he's calling Brahmin as a Vesa Brahmin. That Vesa Brahmin means dubious Brahmin. Ayodhyadas was concretely establishing that account. The mutual repulsion was, and in a way, it is psychological. It is not a physical. Sometimes the physical, when the physical is exhibited, when the marriage between Brahmin and a non-Brahmin, and one crosses over intercaste marriages, interdining, then there is a physical repulse. But otherwise, physical repulsion psychologically created by the Brahmins and the Brahminical philosophy. That is a major this thing. And this is an answer. And Ayodhyadas very, very clearly, emphatically recreating the historical history, in a way, history of the society is a recreating, not the way in which the society created, and is negating block by block, layer by layer. He was negating because he's a scholar of 7 languages: Sanskrit, Tamil, Hindi, English, and even Pali. Therefore, he is able to understand that is why both are very close friends, Ayodhyadas and Lakshmi Narasu. And they had not only they are being a public intellectual of the time, but also they are political activist and engaging and providing alternative to the Brahmanism, alternative. That is what picked up by the Dravidian politics, and even Periyar, he picked up from Ayodhya, and though it is not acknowledged, that is a different question. But Ayodhya was a forerunner, creating the today's what Pagutarivu in Tamil, Pagutarivu rationality. That's it. Yes, sir.
Okay, Ritik.
Yeah, thanks so much, Professor Lakshmanan, for your great presentation and analysis. I hope you could hear me.
Yep, we can. Carry
Thanks.
on.
So I'm just curious about something. I'm going to teach this week. I have to teach Ashoka to my students, and I was quickly going through the the Ashoka part of this book, and it seems to me it's interesting to me that a lot of emphasis is being put on the edicts, the epigraphic sort of sources, but much less on the Avadana literature, right? Or the mythical part of, more traditional part of the stories of Ashoka. So I was wondering, is it because the author is influenced by someone like John Seeley, who is talking about natural religion, writing Ecce Homo, etc. Is it a conscious choice on his part to exclude the mythical part, or is it something else? What is going on behind this decision? I mean, from the point of view of, say, if you're going to try to write intellectual history of this kind of use of Ashoka, right, in the modern authors and their writings, how would we understand this exclusion? Or, I mean, I might be wrong about this because I haven't been able to spend much time on this text, but it seems to me that the emphasis is much more on the archaeologically obtained the epigraphic knowledge, right, and not so much on the Avadana literature and other kinds of stories of Ashoka. And this also contrasts quite a lot with some of the Brahmin scholars who were writing around the same time on Ashoka. Like there's this Bengali Brahmin scholar, Hariprasad Shastri, who was also writing on Ashoka, but who was actually probably drawing more from the stories than from the epigraphic part of the knowledge we can obtain from that period. So this is just out of curiosity. I might be completely wrong with this sort of speculation, but I was wondering if this kind of exclusion has something to do with the kind of love the author has for John Seeley and other such scholars of natural religion. So just, I mean, this is just to all of you, if you could comment on this. And also thanks for all, not just to the presenter, but also other commentators here. Thanks a lot. I learned a lot. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Bye.
Sashit?
Yeah, no, actually, my question, you can hear, right? You can hear me? You can hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, so should I switch off my video? No, actually my question has a, I mean, I think something of the biographical dimensions of Narasu, Lakshmi Narasu, perhaps is implied in the question, right? But I think there is also, so my question is not necessarily meant to complicate some of the contextualization already offered by Professor Lakshmanan and Professor Partha, right? But I'm only adding a dimension to it, and through the work, that there is also a missionary context, right? There is also a missionary context that informs the kind of positions that he's taking, etc. But I mean, I'm not reducing it to a missionary position, but I think there is a missionary context which is also informing the reconstruction, at least parts of the reconstruction that are on offer. And I'm a little emboldened to say this also in the light of the history that, for instance, Rupa Vishwanath is given, right? Which also, gives us a robust sense of the missionary context in which a lot of these articulations participated and so on. So I think this even this mutual repulsion point is actually traceable to a lot of the French Orientalist figures, etc. I mean, Senart, for instance, speaks explicitly. Senart, Celestine Bugel, etc. They also speak explicitly of mutual repulsion as a crucial element of caste, and so on. And I think a lot, at least in the French context, a lot of the Orientalist takes did have a certain inflection with Christianity, with the missionary impulses and so on. So I think I'm not reducing the text to a missionary position. I'm only asking whether some of the takes that are established there in a study of caste, bear a certain influence of certain missionary discourses that are available in the Tamil context around that time.
Thanks, Ashij. Lakshmanan, do you want to respond?
Yes, I completely agree with Professor Sajeev, because there is a clear-cut missionary zeal. That missionary zeal is propagating Buddhism in South India, Madras Presidency. That time it's a Madras Presidency, for which he was taking so much of effort in terms of establishing his missionary of Buddhism. And he has a very clear-cut connection with Sri Lankan and other Burma and elsewhere. And along with Ayodhya, even including with Theosophical Society, support and solidarity. So I cannot dispute, not reject. There is a clear-cut, entire text was written and conceived to in a way of a missionary zeal of Buddhism.
No, just a clarification, Lakshmana. I mean, yes, of course, there is a missionary zeal. I'm talking about Christian missionary discourses that are available in the Tamil context.
And I come to that point. He was highly critical of Christianity, and colonial power. And whatever he has written in 1922, that is how the British is totally negating not to interfere in the structures of power based on the caste, and they are very much convenienced with managing and exploiting the society. And also he referred to 2-3 instances where the British colonial and the Christian missionary become more Brahmanical and more Hinduized, more Sanskritized, and adopted all the rituals and practices which happens in the Brahmanical setup. Same thing was adopted in the Christian practices, missionary as well. And he was citing many instances like that. And even in order to, because I was more firm and authentic in a way, recently the Jayamohan's novel is a historical novel by Jayamohan. It's a Vella Yane, white elephant. It is a metaphor of ice cube. And it is how the colonial power totally rejected the social reconstruction and the social transformation question, particularly the struggle of the caste oppression. And they said, we came here to business. We came here for rule. And we have nothing to do with the culture and the social transformation. And this is a very clear established by, that is what I said, that to understand the caste, I said initially there are several genres in which we can understand, but this genre is emphatic. And another novel by G. Kalyan Rao's Untouchable Spring, which also provides how missionary was rejecting the caste question, not attempt to this, not only colonial, but also missionaries. And their missionary and Rupa Viswanathan's argument recently, though Sanal Mohan makes different argument in terms of contesting Rupa Viswanathan, but Rupa Viswanathan takes the white man's burden, and only white man has civilized the untouchable, civilized the militia, and so on and so forth. But that is not a case. And Sanal Mohan refuting Rupa Viswanathan's claim. But there are other way in which the challenge, the militias, anti-Brahmin has challenged, particularly the untouchable challenge the Brahmanism, particularly in the early 19th, late 18th and 19th century, which is well-established history. So neither colonial power nor a Christian missionary very much, they may be benevolent, but they are not structural change. They are not addressing the structural equality. That is what I say. I hope I answer your question, sir.
No, that's fine. Actually, that's fine. That's fine. It's just a broader hypothesis. That's fine. Absolutely.
So I think we are now nearly at the end of the workshop or seminar. There's only one thing I want to say. This is in response to what Ritik said, that it is a bit intriguing that Lakshmi Narasu does not rely on the Buddhist mythic literature, especially because he has very strong leanings towards Buddhism. And he relies instead on inscriptions of Ashoka. It is well known that, I mean, again, this reflects the contemporary nature of some of the stuff that is written in 1920s, early 1920s, Lakshmi Narasu's work. Today, if most of the scholars who write on Ashoka rely far more on the inscriptions than on that literature, because that is clearly very strongly Buddhist in character, the mythic literature that is found elsewhere. But the inscriptions are widely seen to be reflective of the Ashoka's own voice in some ways. These are his words, or words which he wished to convey as a ruler and as a person, really. So there is a kind of a more scientific, quote unquote, weight which is given. A kind of evidentiary basis is stronger here than the much later literature which is found there in Sri Lanka and in other places in Southeast Asia and Ashoka. So, but I found Lakshmi Narasu's reliance on inscriptions very intriguing, because he is a Buddhist and a Buddhist missionary of sorts. I think that sort of, Lakshmanan, if you have nothing else, may I bring this to a close? I must say, I don't know, Partho is left.
Yeah,
Has
thank you
Partho
very much.
left?
Yeah, thank you, Lakshmanan. Thank you, Rajiv.
Partho is left, but I think I wanted to, maybe others don't know this, and I wanted to end this on a lighter note, because until very recently, the only Lakshmi Narasu that at least people like me knew was a cricketer from a Telugu-speaking cricketer. I don't know if others know about him. M.L. Jaisima. His middle name was Lakshmi Narasu. And that is the only thing, that's the only Lakshmi Narasu that we knew. I'm sure Partho would remember it. But
Jaisima, you knew. I didn't know the middle name. Jaisima, of course.
Of course, everybody knows Jaisima, but his middle name is Lakshmi Narasu. So now we have a much more important Lakshmi Narasu to reckon with. And this is really a fascinating rediscovery. Thank you, Lakshmanan, for bringing him to our attention. These are really very significant works. And there must be many more such figures who need to be revisited in other regions, in other languages, and I'm sure that many of us will kind of look at these works and build a richer intellectual history of that period and of ideas that are still very influential today. So thank you all of you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye Lakshmanan. Thank you.
Yeah. And nice seeing you, Rajiv.
Hi, Sashij.
Yep.
Bye.
Okay. So
Thank you. Bye. Bye.